Hello and welcome to the Knightsman channel. What we got today is the road to the PS5. Now this is a breakdown on the specs, what's inside of the console. So very excited to see this. So yeah, it's going to be good. What we're going to do though is going to skip through because it is 52 minutes. So I'm pretty much just going to skip to some good points. If it starts getting a little bit boring, I think we'll just nudge it to the right and see what's going on because we like to keep things exciting. But yeah, expecting some very big things in this. I've already seen a breakdown of some of the specs already. So we're going to see what our man here has in store for us, and you're going to see if this PS5 is definitely the one for us, which I already semi-know it is because I'm a PlayStation diehard fan, but it's also good just to have a look. Now I've heard already that this is a little bit boring if you're not like tech savvied up like I am. I'm not tech savvied up at all, but let's still see what the man's got to say. So without further ado, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell notification, and comment down below if you're going to get a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox. So without further ado, let's go. Here we go. What does our man got?
Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of capabilities for the new console, and then build it in complete secrecy. For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3, a powerful and groundbreaking console, but also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games for. So, starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around three principles. The first of these is listening to the developers, which is to say that a lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators. We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic games. Which is to say that game creators matter.
Look at those shadows.
Anything we can do to make life easier
Ain't a big crowd, I can tell you that.
Help them realize their dreams, we will do. So
real,
about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers and publishers, sit down, and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see in future consoles. This requires weeks on the road, as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable.
Now I was going to pause it there, and I 100% agree with that. I think a big thing to really pushing forward is seeing exactly what they said, listening to the developers. I think that's extremely important because, you know, they're the ones designing these games. Like, if the hardware isn't up to spec, then, you know, they're the ones that are going to be frustrated more than probably what we are, because they are designing you know, really to build their franchises, build their, you know, their name to get out there to us. But it really needs a big, big partnerships with some of these corporations, Sony and Microsoft, for example. So I guess it is very, very important for them to be listened to, because they can bring, you know, different aspects to what these consoles, you know, can bring to the table. You know, some of the stuff that's what the companies are making groundbreaking is because, you know, that's the ideas from some of these developers, because they probably know, you know, these consoles inside and out because they're the ones developing games for it. So that's my 2 cents. Let's keep going, see what else he's got to say.
By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk. It's also key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution. Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console. In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision.
You're right.
What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running, and trying to minimize that. On the other hand, if we're trying to reduce that dead time to 0, that means the hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back to PlayStation 1 levels. With PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming model. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed. That feels like we're striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it. It's also very important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM. What might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the three principles, the first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer.
Great.
And it was the #1 ask from developers for PlayStation 5. As in, we know it's probably impossible, but can you put an SSD in it? That was a discussion we were also having internally. It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive. And a lot of developer time was being spent designing
a lot of big games too.
Load speeds.
There we go, load speeds.
I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive.
This is PS4
Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data on the disk and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking and only 1/3 of its time actually loading data. Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive. Now, a gigabyte is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD? If we could load 5 gigabytes a second from it, what would change? Now, SSDs are completely different from hard drives. They don't have seeks as such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD, you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that second, pretty much at speed. As for time to load a gigabyte, this is next gen we're talking about, so memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2 gigabytes. And the answer is about 1/4 of a second. I mean, that's amazing. We're talking 2 orders of magnitude.
1 gigabyte in 20 seconds.
Roughly 100
2
times
gigabytes.
Faster. Which means at 5 gigabytes a second for the SSD, the potential is that the game boots in a second. There are no load screens. The game just fades down while loading a half-dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me, this is not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD. The primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer is trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have two rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory. Yep. Which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets.
Painful too.
Having a 30-second elevator ride feels a little extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds like we did for Haven City when we were making Jack 2. The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since
20
then.
years
All
old.
those twisty passages are there for a reason.
Damn,
there's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game.
That's right.
So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second target was to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second?
Yes.
If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data
technology.
You can load.
Damn.
That sounds about right for next gen. Anyway, back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But there's a downside too, which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks and therefore is on the hard drive many, many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times.
Jeez.
What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc.
All right, now let's interject here. So I think the SSD is going to be just mind-blowing. You could see already by the data that it's so much quicker than the PlayStation 4, and it's just mind-blowing. Like, what I'm liking is that, they're really thinking about the developers and opening really that creative side to not be bound by, going from one level to the other, or, going through this long corridor or whatnot. So I think it's perfect. I think it's just that generational leap which we're wanting, which we're needing, and which we're going to experience this year. So yeah, so I think there's enough for the SSD now. Let's see if we can find a little bit more.
And you end up with hardly 8 gigabytes of system memory is idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close to being like more RAM. Typically, it's fast enough that when you realize you need a piece of data, you can just load it from the SSD and use it. There's no need to have lots of data parked in system memory waiting to potentially be used. A different way of saying that is that most of RAM is working on the game's behalf. This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase in size. So back to the dream of the SSD. Here's the set of targets. Boot the game in a second.
Yep.
No load screens.
Okay.
Design freedom, meaning no twisted passages or long corridors. More game on the disk and more game on the SSD.
Yep.
And finally, those patch installs go away.
Oh, those patch installs are...
The reality, though, is that the SSD is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of places.
So I think what they're talking about here is just like more pathways to like clog
in between,
or as you said, bottlenecks. So I think what they do is they've just managed to get past all of these teething issues, I think, is what he's saying here. So let's crack on.
And a number of custom units. On the other side, it connects I/O coprocessors and a large RAM.
Just more.
Now, the kind of storage you need depends on how you're going to use it.
Storage.
If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library and you'd like to take advantage of backwards compatibility to play those games on PlayStation 5, then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there, thus saving the pricier SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles, or you can copy your active PlayStation 4 titles to the SSD. If your purpose in adding more storage is to play PlayStation 5 titles, though, ideally you would add to your SSD storage. We will be supporting certain M2 SSDs. These are internal drives that you can get on the open market and install in a bay in the PlayStation 5.
Yes.
As for which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment. They connect through the custom I/O unit. Here's the catch, though. That commercial drive has to be at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything 5 gigabytes a second.
So what I'm seeing for this is they said you need a SSD that, if you want to add it in, to be just as fast or faster. Now that's crazy, because I think that's a little problem there for people who actually don't know what to really get, or is not tech savvy to the point where they know that it's that they know for sure that their SSD is not going to slow down their console or whatnot. So I think for the average consumer that might be a little bit I guess of a problem, because I mean, a mum ain't gonna know what SSD to get, but I guess we have the internet there to kind of figure that out when it goes down the line. But I don't think there's actually too many like off the shelf ready SSDs for the PlayStation 5. Like, it's gonna come over, like, I don't know, a year or whatnot, but or that's the feeling I get anyway. But they've done a little bit different to what the Xbox has done, where the Xbox has done it, one expandable kind of extra terabyte, 1 terabyte. But these the PlayStation 5 is just going down a different route, I guess. So that's interesting. In terms
by year's
of
end,
all right, what else we got?
Happened by longing to reduce power to use. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features means adding lots of transistors. In fact, the transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU is 62% larger than the transistor count for a PlayStation 4 CU. Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU is backwards compatible with PlayStation 4. What does it say is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips, meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro type.
Look, I'm going to hop on straight away in this. I love that it's PlayStation 4 games. Like, I don't stock PlayStation 1, 2, or 3 games. Like, there might be people out there that do, but for me personally, I'm just happy it plays PlayStation 4. Now, if they do see me like what they've done with Microsoft, where they made it more online, then that kind of makes sense. But again, that clogs things up. So all I care about is that PlayStation 4, it can play PlayStation 4 games. So let's crack on. Let's keep going.
Handles vertex processing, but for the most part, dedicated hardware is responsible for the triangles and other geometry that the vertices form. That or you can use this new usage could be performance BVH. Well, with a bit more of the GPU invested in ray tracing, it should be possible to do some very nice global illumination.
Shadows, reflections.
Having said that, adding ray-traced shadows and reflections to a traditional graphics engine could easily take hundreds of millions of rays a second, and full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go? I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already seen a PlayStation 5 title that's successfully using ray tracing-based reflections in complex animated scenes with only modest, roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro.
Here we go. What we got
this
here?
is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you
why?
just
You're going to surprise me with another console?
You get the same number. But actually, the performance is noticeably different because teraflops is defined as the computational capability of the vector ALU. That's just one part of the GPU. There are a lot of other units. And those other units all run faster when the GPU frequency is higher. At 33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have that much higher bandwidth, and so on. About the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles,
get to the
48 CUs.
when teraflops.
Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat.
Different power consumptions and that, you know, we'll do this to kind of keep it cool.
And shut down if we miss
we'll keep
power.
going.
CPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA 2 Station 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode.
As I said,
we supply a generous. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team came up with.
Yes, give me a nice video too.
How fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, and it wouldn't do to run the GPU and CPU at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops. And we expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency and performance.
Lower than
Similarly,
what the Xbox
running the
is.
CPU at 3 gigahertz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as high as 3.5 gigahertz. In fact, it spends most of its time at that frequency. That doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of % reduction in frequency, so from the controller, such as rumble or audio. The SPUs and cells of locations around you.
Here we go. This is going to be a good
And this
one.
provided hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix.
Oh, okay.
It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve. But the idea was that if we stopped using just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of locations around you, then at some point...
So what they're basically saying here is, you know, especially with like headphones in there, I think it's going to be very well done where you can hear raindrops kind of behind, like around over here, like kind of just around anywhere, as you can see in the picture. And like I think it's going to be extremely well done when it comes to like enemies, and you can actually hear where they are. You know, you're going to be so immersed in the kind of the games and that, where if you can hear something rustling back here, you know, you ain't searching in front of you, it's right over there, and that's where you're going to, you know, turn around and shoot or whatever you need to do. But I think audio, which, you know, they've got high expectations, high goals for the PlayStation 5, is going to be amazing, I think. So, you know, very well done, I think.
Your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game. This has the capacity to affect your appreciation of the game, just like music in a game does.
Yep.
The concept of locality is simpler. It's just your sense of sound inside the ear,
I think, like
22 speakers. We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations. Using an HRTF when rendering audio creates unparalleled.
Yeah, that's real cool. So they're really diving in. And I think some of these little features, you know, are they going to be enough to kind of tip me and say, you know, do I go for this more than like a more powerful console, which could be the Xbox? You know, it's going to be all these little things which could, you know, add up to be quite big, which is
quality,
you know,
but
cool.
It's sound source for everything.
What else we got?
If we were to use the same algorithms as PSVR, that's enough for
don't really much too much
surround
about
sound setup with
reality,
6 or more speakers, all of which need different sound source might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point.
Yep.
There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources. But alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices.
Yep.
The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers,
Headphones.
all of which
It
need
is what
different
it is.
approaches. That's a lot.
All right, what
Virtual
else we got?
surround sound has a lot in common with 3D audio
See
on
how
headphones,
cool was
but
that?
it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger. And we're also working to boost the sense of locality.
Interesting.
Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a similar level, after which we'll start in on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound. It's now to the point where some of the PlayStation 5 games in development are extensively using these systems. One of the game demos allows you to toggle between conventional PlayStation 4 style stereo audio and our new 3D audio. Are going to be big topics.
Look, I think that's pretty much us for the road to the PS5. Now let's just do a little quick evaluation on what I think of what I saw just then. Now, it feels like a little bit of a college lecture, to be honest. They'd said before on some of the videos I've seen also, it does feel like that. It does feel a little bit boring, and he's just kind of like a professor up there, and you're just kind of it's got that feeling about it. Now, I think that's what they're trying to do. I don't think this is supposed to be like a hype video, because it definitely wasn't. I'm waiting for the entertainment hype video to come out for Sony, where it shows like the reveal, what it looks like, the price, all that sort of stuff, all that hype sort of stuff, all the different other aspects, which he did say that will come down when they start tearing into the console. So that should be cool. I'm waiting for that. What do I think about the specs? Look, I think they're definitely thinking about it. They definitely went to out to the developers and really got their opinions. That's why they went with the SSD. They're really focusing on obviously that 3D audio. Definitely gonna probably wearing more of this during the PS5 experience if it's gonna make me more immersed in the environment. But yeah, hey, look, I'm not a very tech savvy person, but they, it is what it is. They got 10.3 teraflops. Is that going to be a huge difference to the 12 something that the Xbox has? It's going to be very, very interesting, I think, definitely for the PS5 to battle their competition. Do I think they're doing the right things with certain different aspects? I think they are. If they get all the little things right, then that could lead to it just being so smooth and just a console which the people want. Especially with the ray tracing, if they get that done right, just the loading times, which we've already seen videos of both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox, loading up pretty quick. So it's pretty exciting to see this next generation. And that brief little snippet across all of that, we were just pinpointing just certain things on the screen which we can kind of pick out of. But I did do I will do a PlayStation 5 to a PlayStation or PS5 versus the Xbox X, which will be probably linked after this video. But I have done that, so it's interesting. We'll see what's going on anyway between the console wars, and we'll see what new videos Sony and Microsoft bring out to really get us engaged into these consoles. I'm pretty excited, to be honest. I am a PlayStation man, so I want to see what Microsoft are doing to kind of pull me on the middle track. So I'm just peeping over at the moment to see what the console's doing, but we'll see what's going on anyway. Regardless, they might even bring out another console. This might be only one of them, and they're just secretly waiting to just bang, hit Microsoft with a left hook. With a way more powerful console, which they know nothing about. But that's not confirmed. None of that's confirmed. I'm just hoping here, but that would be nice. But who knows? You know, it could be a lot quicker, a lot smoother than the Xbox, even though Xbox seems to be more powerful. But we'll kind of go with the flow and see what's going on. I think I'm a PlayStation man though. I've got a lot of backlog of PlayStation 4 games, so it is compatible, which we've seen in just before in the video. So, you know, I think Sony's doing the right direction, but they need to start making me excited. They need to start giving me a little bit more information to build a better picture, because at the moment I'm only scraping the barrel on some of this info. But yeah, hey, if you like that video, make sure you smash that like button, hit the subscribe button and bell notification, and comment down below what console you think is better, more powerful, or what you're going to get. But apart from that, hopefully you enjoyed that little snippet. I try to condense it down a little bit and kind of go with the flow, but yeah, that's kind of us. But thank you very much for watching. Stay safe out in the big wide world, and that is Knightsman out. Cha-ching.